It all started one fine sunny day in the duchy, where the maids, as always, were spreading a lot of rumors. One of them said that she couldn't believe that there really was a man who wanted to marry Lady Lytton. For them, it was amazing. Another servant suggested that it was very nice when the Duke himself supported you. However, they were amazed by the fact that he agreed to this marriage, because she was an illegitimate child. That is, a half-breed. At that moment, the maid entered the lady's room and brought her hot water, which was exactly what the girl had asked for. The woman didn't even react to this. However, the maid came closer to her and repeated herself, and said that she had brought her hot water. She asked why the mistress held her brushes so strangely, and asked if the girl would like the maid to touch up her makeup. The Duchess of Lytton said that there was no need for it. Then the maid handed her her warm water again, and said that she had asked for it. But the maid also warned the mistress that it was difficult to get warm water, so she asked the Duchess to drink absolutely everything, the girl asked her. However, as soon as she reached out, she accidentally knocked over the cup. It was very hot because the water was really boiling. The maid, seeing this, was very shocked and immediately began to shout at Mrs. Lytton and asked why she did this, because she almost got burned. The lady ignored these words. She only asked to be given a mirror. The maid sighed heavily and said that even though she said she was unhappy with this event, a wedding was still a wedding after that. She indignantly said that there was a dressing table in the room so she could calmly go to the mirror herself. The girl understood that nothing good could be expected from them. So she went to the mirror herself. And as soon as she saw the reflection of a fair-haired, blue-eyed young girl there, she was shocked. As soon as she tried to comprehend what had happened, she suddenly had a very severe headache. The maid, of course, was indignant and yelled at her again, saying that now was not the right time for her to rest, since the ceremony was about to begin very soon. But Lyta replied that she didn't want to see any balls of blood or corpses, and when the maids heard this, they were very surprised and asked what exactly she meant. The girl, realizing that she said this out loud, sighed heavily, but tears appeared in her eyes. But she forced a smile onto her face and told them not to take it to heart. The maids had absolutely no idea what it was all about. They assumed that she had gone crazy right before her own wedding, and because of this, they became wary. But the lieutenant's mistress turned to the brown-haired maid and told her to open the door, because the Duke was already coming. The maid looked at her partner and immediately asked what she was talking about. Why would the Duke even go to this place? The girl didn't know she should obey her, but the maid waved her hands and replied that they should follow her instructions, even though she was an illegitimate child. Therefore, they simply had no choice. As soon as the maid opened the door, the Duke actually walked in. He was a tall, dark-haired man, and he looked very stern. As soon as the man entered and saw Mrs. Lytton, he immediately asked if she had really been crying, because he noticed her red and swollen eyes. He said that even all her makeup was running after this. The ceremony was about to start. So he told the maids to hurry up and fix this whole misunderstanding. The maids bowed and immediately told the Duke that they would do everything. However, the girl suddenly waved her hand. She told the Duke that he had aged quite a lot during this time. The man certainly didn't expect to hear this, so he was very surprised and asked what she meant. The Duchess replied that she was very sorry, but they would have to change their plans for that day. Of course, upon hearing this, the man was very indignant. The beautiful girl's name was Rosanna, and he screamed in indignation and asked who she thought she was. She smiled happily and said that today's wedding was cancelled. She was no longer going to dance to his tune. In fact, the girl was the guardian of the Empire, the heroes who defended the Empire, the faithful dog who protected Bellis for hundreds of years. And when the war ends and peace comes to the Empire, the guardian must return to the endless darkness, this feudal existence, after which not even a name would remain of her. A tiring life in which there was nothing but endless war and darkness. This is exactly what Rosanna had to endure. Of course, she wanted to stop this cycle that simply had no end. To be honest, she just wanted to be free. Even the hot wind that ruffled her hair. And even if all that was left was the burnt sing and terrible smell, she still wanted to feel it with her body. However, this was just her unattainable dream. This time, she was dying again. I thought that she would plunge into deep darkness, and she would be called when she was needed. But Rosanna was wrong when it seemed to her that a lot of time had passed. Consciousness suddenly returned to them, but this time everything was completely different. The girl opened her eyes and found herself together, where there were no screams, no smell of blood. She could not believe that the seal was broken in this world. Only after looking in the mirror and seeing her appearance did she realize that she had woken up in a completely different body. And that even gave her a headache. Along with the pain that she had never experienced before, memories came flooding back to her. The owner of this body was Rosanna Leylata. She was the only princess daughter of the Duke of the Empire, but her life turned out to be very unfortunate. Her mother was a commoner and abandoned Rosanna, who was conceived after a night together with the Duke. And despite the fact that the Duke took Rosanna to himself, he did not have warm feelings for his daughter. And the girl who had waited her entire life for her father's favor chose a political marriage to prove her importance. However, The Duke did not stop Rosanna, although he himself knew perfectly well what this marriage would ultimately lead to, and the last memory of this matter was how she fell, unable to take even her last breath. When the girl moved into her body, she suggested that perhaps her soul itself was broken. But when she met this Duke, it was hard for her to believe that she called this fool her father and hoped to be loved until the very end. For her, it was really very strange. She didn't understand the logic of her character. When the man asked her to repeat what she was saying, the girl became indignant. She asked if he really had trouble hearing, and then she repeated to him again that there would be no wedding. The girl said that the future groom was the young Marquis of Giselle, and he was a pervert, and she simply couldn't stand them. So with these words, she would go and explain everything to him. But at that moment, the Duke was very shocked. He reached out to his daughter and asked what kind of horror she was saying then. He grabbed her by the shoulders and even began to shake her. When the girl felt his hands on her shoulders, she screamed loudly. She did not understand why this simple touch was so painful for her. But the man finally saw her expression and let the girl go. He yelled at her and said that he hadn't even laid a finger on her, so he asked her to stop pretending. Rosani then took the Duke's hand and said that there was something wrong with his hand. The man continued to be indignant at her. He said that she was behaving completely unceremoniously. However, the girl, holding his hand, asked if it was true that he could endure all this. Of course, the man was not in pain. However, he was scared. He did not know what to expect from this girl, and asked what she was planning. However, Rosani suddenly squeezed his hand tighter, and said that today's wedding was organized only to strengthen the ducal family. The man was getting more and more painful. He said in a trembling voice that she had volunteered. The girl said that everything was exactly like that. However, it was he who had dragged her into this situation. She looked at him with an icy gaze and added, "From now on, don't dare involve me in your plans for personal gain. Pushing a person who is bound to die soon off a cliff instead of saving him is also considered murder." If someone needed this marriage so badly, then the girl believed that he could enter into it himself. And the man himself was still in his prime, so he did not need her services. Seeing the pain on his face, she finally smiled, let go of his hand, and told him not to pretend so much. She didn't even have time to really do anything with him. After that, Rose turned around and left. She thought that he had already had enough. After all, he had always been a ridiculously smart person. Looking at the Duke's face, the girl concluded that about 10 years had passed since she was sealed for the last time. However, there was no talk back then about the Duke having an illegitimate child, as her existence was revealed only after the girl had been sealed away. The girl walked along the corridors and realized that her strength was the same as in her past life, but her defense still weakened right when she took hot water and at the moment when the Duke grabbed her. So Rose decided that, first of all, she needed to figure everything out, and then find out what really happened. Even if she gained this freedom completely by accident, she certainly could not allow herself to be oppressed through this marriage. Rose walked up to the open window and thought that this world was so colorful that it even felt strange to her for a while. After that, she thought about how lonely it was for the girl who lived in this body before, because she was completely alone in this beautiful world. But she promised herself that from that moment on, she would love her and be the one who would always love her. She felt so many emotions that she was ready to burst into tears. So, Rose calmed down in time. She couldn't cry like that every time she saw something amazing. At first, she decided that meeting with the young Marquis, canceling the wedding at the moment, was the most urgent matter that she was going to carry out immediately. At that very moment, a large number of guests had already gathered in the banquet hall. The musicians were playing wonderful classical music, and people were enjoying the atmosphere. However, there were still guests who condemned this interior. One of the aristocrats said that it was terrible to simply prepare such a wedding hall. She was not at all happy with the fact that there were almost no living flowers there, and the chandelier was not worth anything at all. They agreed with her friend, and told her that even though she was a half-blood, she still remained the daughter of a duke, so she needed to prepare better. But the other girl thought that this lady's wedding didn't matter at all. After all, the most important thing was that the House of Lighton and the House of Giselle were now uniting. In fact, the people around had gathered there mostly to win the Duke over, so they continued their conversation. However, suddenly, a new person entered the room. It was Rose herself. Everyone around immediately started looking at her. They noticed that the girl had smeared makeup and swollen eyes, so they realized that she probably had a good cry before coming here. This even made them a little sad, because crying on their wedding day was really terrible. When Rosie went inside, she saw beautiful precious stones on the chandelier. They were as delightful as the stars. The scent of flowers brought warmth to life, and when she looked at all the people present, she realized that they looked quite happy. In the child's memories, everything was so hostile. However, now the girl realized that they probably intended to congratulate her, at least on this day. Rosie felt that even if the wedding was canceled, she should still express her gratitude. So she addressed everyone present and said that she was very glad that they were all having fun. She added that it was an honor for her to be greeted in such a magnificent and beautiful hall, and she will never forget this day until the end of her life. Rosie will definitely remember him for a very long time. At that moment, people started talking among themselves. They didn't understand why she had such a strange tone and even thought that she had really gone crazy, as the rumors said. But Rosie said that now everyone could go their separate ways. There was no need for further congratulations because the wedding would not take place. The girl refused this marriage, so there was no longer any need for people to stay there. As soon as the aristocrats heard this, they were very shocked and could not believe that it was true. At that moment, an elderly man ran out from behind the crowd, turned to the lady and asked her to stop, because the girl had already started to leave there herself. But when Rosie turned her attention to him, the man asked why she was acting so ignorant. If she had gotten off on her own, she should at least have maintained a sense of etiquette. It was so important for them, because it was not an easy wedding, and the wedding for the Duke. The girl, hearing this, was a little surprised, and immediately thought about something, but the man had already changed the subject. This elderly man said that he would like to know whether the Duke even knows now about her behavior and the words that she allowed herself to say. Rosie replied that of course he was aware. The man then sighed, and thought that she would say that of course he wasn't aware. So he had already said that they needed to go to him. However, quite quickly he realized that she said something completely different, and was very surprised. He immediately asked what she meant. Rose explained that the Duke already knew everything, and asked if there were any other problems, as she did not want to stay long. She also said that it was her wedding, so she would follow her heart, and was not going to listen to any instructions. The man was incredibly amazed. He thought that she was angry and not joking. Perhaps Duke Lighton had missed everything, and therefore allowed her to do it. In the end, he did not stay in her way. Rosie began to leave the hall, and realized that everyone around was very afraid of the Duke. So they did not even try to stop her. But this was not surprising, because his power had changed greatly compared to what it was 10 years ago. And to this day, Rosie remembered how he whined that he was too afraid of dragons, and also refused to join the enslavement squad. While everything else changed, the only one who remained the same was the girl. She left the banquet hall, and went in search of the Guardian after waking up in the body of Rosanna. She discovered that she had a preserved ability, but there were also those that did not exist before. The only thing she could confirm for sure was that her powerful work was lost, but the powerful energy was still present. And when she felt the presence of the young Marquis while walking along the corridors, she realized that her sense of smell had not disappeared. She realized that she could distinguish the presence of people with whom this body had met before. This was quite convenient because the accuracy was at a good level. And this is important. When the Marquis came closer to Rose, he was very surprised to see her, and asked if she really missed him so much that she even decided to go on his trips herself. When the girl saw this short brunette who looked very sloppy, she realized that he was even uglier than even in her heroine's memories. She was going to get rid of him quickly, so she said that she was not looking for him at all. She told him the news that the wedding would no longer take place, because she did not want to marry a pervert. She also warned him that the Duke already knew everything, and that he, the young Marquis, must also convey everything to his father, Marquis Giselle, because this decision was final. When the man heard this, he was very shocked, and immediately addressed her by name and asked what she was even saying. Indignant, Rose corrected him, and said that they had not even really met. It was just a political marriage for their families. Therefore, in her opinion, he should have initially known how to properly show respect to his partner. The Marquis was, of course, very worried about the situation that had happened, because many people had gathered for their wedding. But the girl didn't care. She believed that canceling the wedding was still better than a divorce, so he should even be grateful to her. In the end, the guy couldn't take it anymore. He yelled at her and asked if she had accidentally gone crazy. He moved closer to the girl and said that she herself had started this mess by saying that she wanted to help the family. However, as soon as their wedding day arrived, for some reason, she decided to give up on all of this. Mocking her decision, he asked what she thought Duke Lighton would think if she destroyed all of this, but the girl calmly replied that he would think of her as a lady. Of course, the Marquis didn't mean this at all, and with a heavy sigh, he asked why no one understood what exactly he was saying today. Rosie was tired of talking to him. She asked if he even understood anything. She made it clear that he should not address her by her name, but he still continued to do it, violating her wishes. She also said that the young Marquis should study the basics of etiquette again before he enters into marriage next time, because another lady might not even tolerate such treatment. The Marquis suddenly grimaced and told you to stop, and stop doing what you will soon regret. But Rosie, hearing these words, didn't even blink an eye. She said that first he needs to realize his own place, because as soon as he understands what kind of person he is, then life will become easier. In conclusion, the girl said that he himself understood perfectly well that he was completely unsuitable for her, so she did not understand why he continued all this. The man became seriously angry. He shouted very loudly, and said that he had clearly warned her not to do something that she could quickly regret. At that moment, he swung at her and grabbed the girl by the shoulder so that she could not even dodge the blow if something happened. Rosie was very outraged by his behavior. After all, not only was he a pervert, but he was also prone to violence. But this was a fairly common combination. She wasn't the least bit afraid of his fist. However, she knew that if this body took the blow, it would hurt a little. So she needed to avoid this blow by any means possible. She already wanted to tell him something, but didn't have time because a black-haired man appeared behind her. He intercepted the Marquis's blow and said that it was their business, and therefore he didn't want to interfere at all. However, doing such a thing was already too much, so the man could not even pass by. It would violate his principles. After the Marquis calmed down, the man approached Summer. He hugged her and asked if everything was okay with her, because he was really worried. When Rose looked into those eyes, they seemed very familiar to her. They were red, like rubies. Even though the girl couldn't remember where she could see him, she still couldn't stop being amazed that human eyes could shine as brightly as precious stones. When the man looked at her with alarm and asked the same question from behind again, Rosie still nodded in agreement after learning that everything was okay with her for him. This turned out to be a great relief. However, she still felt somehow strange that she did not notice him until he himself approached her, and even if she had not met him before, she should have felt his presence with the help of her power. When the Marquis saw this man, he was very scared, and called him Duke Warpheus. Rosie, hearing this name, immediately remembered that there was only one Duke Warpheus that she knew. Then she realized that this man who stood next to her was a Chaitin. The man stepped forward a little, and asked if the Marquis had really tried to attack the bride on their wedding day. He also said with disgust that the young Marquis turned out to be even more terrible than he could have ever imagined. Of course, the man had nothing to say to this. He only asked how his lordship ended up in this place. Chaitin replied that she too had received an invitation from the Marquis Giselle. But then he suddenly asked if the guy was really hinting that he shouldn't have come at all. Of course, the guy realized that he had been misunderstood. He said that this was not at all the case and was about to add something else. However, the Duke did not let him do so. Chaitin looked at him with contempt and sighed, saying that His Highness had sent him to the battlefield of the Civil War, and I hoped that he would simply die there. However, it didn't work out that way. He also asked, "You're asking because I'm standing here alive and I came to the banquet." The Marquis immediately began to say that all this was not so, and that it was simply a misunderstanding. But the Chevalier came closer to him, and said in a quiet, angry voice that he would like to know what had just happened, and whether he really considered this to be some kind of misunderstanding. Without waiting for an answer, he said that Lady Rosanna was the only lady in the Leighton family of the great faithful house of their emperor, and it was simply unthinkable to raise a hand against such a lady. Passing by the Marquis, he also said that, as he already knows, His Highness is so cruel that he even sends his own nephew, that is, him, to war, exposing him to mortal danger. And if he heard about this incident, something truly terrible would have happened. The Marquis, thinking about this, became very scared, and immediately said that he did not want everything to happen like this, and he was very sorry. Chaitin smiled, and said that, since the Marquis said so, there was, of course, no reason not to believe him. He said that, in that case, he himself would inform His Majesty that the wedding was cancelled, and he would not need to worry about this matter. But the guy bowed and said that, of course, he shouldn't have done that. After all, he himself could have explained everything after that. He ran away so that no one would argue with him anymore. When Rosie was left alone with the man smiled and said that she could not thank him. However, the girl said the same phrase at the same time. They were both surprised to hear this, and the man even asked if she had decided to repeat a little after him, but the girl replied that this was not at all the case. She just always spoke like that. She also said that if she married the young Marquis of the House of Leighton, she would only become stronger, and the Emperor's power would become even stronger. That's why the girl explained that it wouldn't have been to his advantage. That's why she said that he didn't have to thank her for the fact that she had just destroyed his brother. When Chaitin heard this, he was still amazed. He could not believe that the girl was really so self-confident that she said something like that. He was silent for a while, and when he was about to tell her something, the butler suddenly approached him. He said that His Majesty had called him, so he had to go there immediately. Of course, someone's. But he didn't like it. He suddenly smiled and said that apparently this time His Majesty also hoped to see his nephew without any limb. But now, when the news reached him that he was alive and well, the man was definitely disappointed and decided to see for himself. He then took Rosie's hand and kissed it goodbye, saying that it was time for him to go. How could he say that he wanted to congratulate her on the wedding that was supposed to happen that day? However, now he had to congratulate her on the contrary, on the dissolution of this marriage. Rosie was a little surprised, but she smiled and thanked the man for this. Of course, he was wary of her. However, he did not focus his attention on this. In any case, he said that he was looking forward to their next meeting after that. Together with the butler, he finally left. Rosie then realized that the Emperor probably hadn't changed by now. He should have already noticed that her soul had disappeared. So she was wondering how he would react to all this. The next day, when Rosie went out to the gazebo to drink tea and inspect the area, she came to the conclusion that this body had no physical strength at all. And yet her strength remained the same. So she considered this situation even stranger. But over the past few days, she had become convinced that her heightened senses were still detecting someone's presence, and her reflexes were reacting to stimuli in the same way as always. She believed that it was probably because of the divine protection of his blessings bestowed upon her soul when she was still a hero who traveled to various hotspots and saved humanity. Rosie believed that if the blessing associated with the soul was still active, it meant that the sealing spell had not changed either. And when her true identity is revealed, there is a high probability that she will lose her freedom again. Because of this, the girl was upset. She realized that she needed to cut the hair of the emperor and every member of the royal family who had the keeper's seal. Then no one would know who she really was, and she could breathe a sigh of relief. And if Rosie wants real freedom, she will have to break this pier. But the problem was that she knew too little information. She was born with stunning powers for no reason, which her parents denied her out of fear. But in order to survive, she went on her first wave at the age of 17, all for the sake of catching the eye of the emperor and being sealed. That's all she knew about herself. But the girl also knew information that the last time the seal was removed was 10 years ago, during the battle with the Black Dragon. Then, she assumed that the comrade with whom she fought side by side could know something about this. Ruji decided that, at the moment, she did not need to rack her brains in search of answers, because the person who could answer if she asked was very close by, and she felt it. In order to get the necessary answers to her questions, she went to the Duke's chambers. But there the butler stopped her and said that he currently needed rest, so he could not let her in. Rosie was very indignant when she heard this. She said that she only had a few questions for the Duke. The man immediately said that she should have addressed him as her father, but he still could not let her in. Rosie realized that if she continued like this, no one would let her in. So she sighed heavily and said that she had a couple of questions for her father and asked to be taken there. Of course, the butler didn't give in so easily. He said that he had to ask the Duke himself first. But the man who overheard their conversation said that everything was fine and allowed her to enter. When Rosie entered the office, she said that she came to him on one matter. The man was lying in bed sorting through some papers, and, seeing his daughter, greeted her. The first thing the girl noticed was his bandaged hand and asked if he had managed to injure it somewhere. Daria, the butler, answered for him. He said that on the day of her wedding with his lordship, an accident occurred, as a result of which he injured his hand. At that moment, Rosie thought about it. I realized that she had adored that very hand back then, and assumed that most likely this trace was left directly from her. Meanwhile, the Duke, sighing heavily, turned to the girl and asked if she hadn't said that she had some business. He wanted her to quickly ask her question and leave. Rosie got down to business. She said that she heard that 10 years ago, a subjugation squad was formed to seal the Black Dragon, and so she wanted to know where these people were at the moment. The Duke, upon hearing this, was very surprised, and said that he did not know that she had an interest in such a thing. Indignant, his daughter asked him to stay on topic and answer her question. For a while, the man thought about it, but then he said that since he didn't see anything wrong with it, he was ready to answer her this question. At that moment, Ruji thought that they were probably all alive and well, and perhaps even nearby, because his reaction was very relaxed. Well, pretty quickly the girl became disappointed because her father said that they were all dead. Seeing her sad expression, he suddenly remembered that he had made a slight mistake. One of them still survived. It was His Grace, the Grand Duke Warfoss. Rosie cleared her throat and asked in a trembling voice, was it really true that everyone except him was absolutely dead? The man said that this is exactly how it was. In such cases, it is customary to send those who are destined to die to the front lines, but Rosie continued to insist. She asked when they all managed to die. She asked if this really happened on the way back or on the battlefield, but the Duke turned to his daughter and said that it should not concern her, and asked why she even asked about this. But Rosie didn't understand what was wrong with studying the Empire's affairs. The Duke replied that of course there was nothing wrong, but his answers should have been enough already. He also warned that it wouldn't do her any good if she learned even more information. In a rather mysterious but stern voice, he said that it would not be useful for her or for their family. Rosie then realized that something important was hidden there, and therefore had to find out as soon as possible. Seeing her expression, he said that if she ran out of words on this question, he would like her to leave and not dare to mention anything outside this room, about everything they had just talked about, even about his hand. After the girl left, she thought about all this. She really thought that they were all alive. Rosie knew perfectly well that they would be seriously injured, but she certainly couldn't imagine that it would be fatal. Besides, they were strong enough to successfully seal the Mad Dragon. But seeing the Duke's reaction, she realized that something was wrong, something significant enough to threaten even the safety of the family. So she was going to study this issue in detail, And first of all, she wanted to meet with Warpheus. Suddenly, the butler ran past her. He approached the Duke's assistant and said that the guest had already arrived, but the assistant, indignant, said that he had warned her that he did not intend to receive anyone that day. The guy said that he had conveyed his words to him. However, the guest insisted on his own and ultimately remained waiting in the reception area. When the assistant asked who it was that was so persistent, the butler said that it was His Grace, the Grand Duke Warpheus. Hearing this, Rosie could not stay in place any longer. She immediately ran to meet him. She heard that he was in the reception room, so she wanted to get there before the butler. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to speak with precision and in person. So the girl, even despite her long and heavy dress, ran there headlong. When she opened the doors, she immediately turned to Mr. Warpheus. The man, meanwhile, simply sat in his place. He looked at her in surprise, but then a smile appeared on his face, and he said that he was told that he was not receiving guests today, so he was already getting ready to leave. However, now that he saw the Duke's daughter, he realized that she apparently found a minute to talk with him, and this made him very happy. The girl, meanwhile, took a broom that was nearby and closed the door with it, so that no one would dare to enter. When the guy saw this, he was very surprised. However, he did not ask her about what she was doing. He only said that it was a very original way to greet his guest. When the girl sat down opposite him, what did they say there? In fact, he arrived at this place on this day in order to question the Duke and his daughter. But he was happy that she herself decided to come to him, so he was going to ask her personally. Rosie immediately told him to continue and ask what he wanted. The man looked closely into her eyes and asked, "Do you have anything to do with the sealing of the Black Dragon?" As soon as she heard this, the girl immediately became wary. She could not understand how he could even recognize her. Of course, she knew that Varflis was also of royal blood, so she had to accept the fact that he could also feel her soul. She made a mistake in relying on camaraderie. After all, they were once comrades, and fought together many years ago. Rosie decided that the best way to handle this situation was to play dumb, so she made a surprised face and asked what he even meant. The man answered in an irritated voice so that she would not deny it. He had already felt everything at that moment. Rosie really wanted to hit him. However, she did not have time to do anything. And all because he got up from his place and sat next to her and also put his hand on hers. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he suddenly did this. Smiling, Chaitin said that, indeed, last time everything was exactly the same. At the moment when he took Lady's hand, the loud voice that sounded in his head suddenly stopped abruptly. In fact, it was the curse of the sealed Mad Dragon. Then he thought that it might be a mistake. However, now that he rechecked it all, he could be absolutely sure. He said that as soon as he took her hand, everything immediately became quiet. Rosie looked at him in surprise. She could not believe that this was really the effect of the sealed dragon. But she also became curious about where he got this terrible curse from. At that moment, the man suddenly moved closer to her. He said that he wanted the young lady to heal him with this hand. The girl then asked for more information. She asked when exactly he became infected. The man replied that this had been the case since the dragon was sealed. He always carried with him a special remedy capable of suppressing this madness. But of course, it was not able to rid him of these consequences completely. Rosie replied that she understood everything. After that, she said that she didn't have that much time, so she was going to tell him the whole truth. She didn't have time to finish saying anything because they started knocking on their door. She said that the thing was that she would have to leave as soon as this door opened. While they continued to knock on their door, the girl decided to clarify this information that she heard and asked if he really needed her. Smiling, he replied that he said this with an absolutely pure heart, so he definitely couldn't do without her. Chaitin also said that if he gets what he wants, he will never let anyone look down on the young lady again, and asked her how she came to this idea. However, Rosie surprised him greatly. After all, she said that she didn't care. She just wanted him to promise her something, and that would be enough for her. She took him by the collar and pulled him closer to her. She said that in the future, no matter what, he would have to fulfill one of her wishes, whatever it might be. Even if it concerns the Emperor's head, he will be obliged to simply carry it out. He smiled and asked if she was really serious in her words, and whether she knew how dangerous it was. The girl said that His Highness, who serves the Emperor, would never allow her to meet the Grand Duke. So her plan was for him to see everything for himself. At that moment, the butler had already broken down the doors, and Rosie finally said that if he still wanted to make a deal with her, he should have kissed her right then. She said that there is no better way to connect a girl and a man than this. He can think of it as artificial respiration, if he wants. After all, it could be easier to perceive. Then the Chaitin suddenly moved her hair from her face, and, moving his lips towards her, he asked for forgiveness, saying that this would last no more than a minute. He nevertheless made a deal with the girl in this way, and they kissed, right on the lips, in front of all the butlers who entered the room at that very second. As soon as they saw this, they immediately ran up to the lady and tried to stop her. They certainly didn't expect this. And after that day, rumors spread like wildfire in high society that there had been a kiss between Roseanne and someone. The Duke tried to put an end to all these rumors. However, shutting up the hordes with their long tongues turned out to be a very difficult task. And the rumors spread so far that they even reached the nobility of the royal family in the provinces. These rumors suggested that the Leylatin family, once central to the Emperor's faction, might now be entwined with the Grand Duke of Warface. Of course, Rosie's father was very angry after these rumors spread. He called his daughter to him and said that he did not understand why she was always causing problems. He didn't understand why she couldn't act quietly like she had before. But Rosie said that he himself told her to do what she wanted. Well, of course, the man got even more angry when he heard this, because he didn't mean this kind of situation at all. He asked his daughter if she really thought that with these words, he meant to say that he was giving free rein to her desire. The girl thought for a moment and said, "Don't your words correspond to your actions?" Then my father shouldn't have said these words to me earlier. The Duke was so angry that he even told her to never call him her father again, and the girl did just that. For her, it was no problem at all, since she initially wanted to call him Duke. When the man calmed down a little, he sat back down in his seat and said that, in any case, he could not leave this incident unattended. For this reason, he will simply give her the limit that for some time she was under house arrest and could not leave the estate again. When Rosie heard this punishment, she was ready to laugh. She could not believe that he really locked her in the estate. Although this incident happened in the living room, which could easily be entered by anyone, it was not even in the bedroom. She knew that he still had a lot to learn. Then, suddenly the Duke said that it didn't matter, even if she didn't answer, since the moment she called off the wedding, she had completely gotten out of hand. So he had to make a strong-willed decision. Rosie wasn't interested in any of this at all. She noticed that her father still had a bandage on his arm and said that he had been wearing it for quite a long time. Then she looked at her arm and realized that she couldn't control her strength. The girl explained that she had no intention of squeezing his hand so hard. When the Duke heard this, he was very surprised, but asked what she was talking about, because he accidentally spanked his hand on the day of her wedding, and because of this, he felt ill and got hurt. Then, in a rather angry voice, he said that he was the Grand Duke of Lighton, and asked, "Do you really think that I could get injured just because my own daughter grabbed me?" Rosie replied that it was rather strange to injure his hand due to its poor condition, and besides, if he had grouped himself correctly when falling, he would not have hurt himself. The man wasn't going to listen to her anymore. He asked, hadn't he already ignored the question about calling off her wedding? After such a stunt, she at least should not have created new problems for him. And because she did this, he was very angry. He slammed his hand on the table and said that only a little while had passed since her so-called wedding. However, she again decided to put his reputation at risk. He shouted at her so loudly and asked why she did such a thing to a man. But at that moment, his neck began to hurt incredibly badly, and he even fell silent abruptly. Rosie came closer to him and said that his anger was growing with every word he said, and that he needed to learn to control his aggression. Otherwise, it could end badly for him. But the Duke still began to shut her mouth. The girl thought that he was very angry, although she only expressed her concern. Now, as a reasonable person, she was going to simply control herself better and not say too much. After he had shouted at her for some time, he sighed heavily and said that His Majesty had probably already heard all these terrible, shameful rumors. Rosie thought that of course it was. After all, she did all this on purpose so that he was one of the first to find out about these rumors. The Emperor would probably try to find the girl. However, she knew that if she could find a way to break this seal, she could do what she wanted. To do this, we must try to weaken the Emperor's power in order to protect the freedom he has been granted. However, House Leiter is the only ducal house in the Empire that is also the core of the Imperial faction. If a rumor spreads that the Duke is moving away from the Emperor, then the other powers in the Empire will naturally weaken their strength. However, for Rosie, the problem was that she had been wearing a collar since childhood and had never even thought about cutting it off and finally gaining freedom of action. She understood that they couldn't even imagine how powerful this Herzer could be, who was now angry at his own daughter and was practically breathing fire because of it. She was happy that everything worked out this way, so when the Duke calmed down a little, she said that the rumors had already spread, and now, in this situation, she had a solution. When the man heard about this, he immediately became happy and asked what kind of decision it was. However, what Rosie said did not make him happy at all, and all because the girl, looking straight into his eyes, said in a calm voice that there would be no other marriage situation, so they could announce their marriage to the Grand Duke. Of course, the man got really angry then. He shouted at her, but also told her to just get out of his sight for her own safety. But after this kiss happened, the man returned to this pleasant memory for his heart for a very long time. One day, his assistant came to him for a meeting, and seeing that the man did not even react to him, asked if everything was okay with him. He was also touching his lips in a strange way. Chayton was a little embarrassed. However, he quickly removed his hand from his lips and returned to reality. He said that he was just thinking for a bit, that's all. The assistant immediately asked if it was really all about the Emperor. He had heard that he had again made him wait all night and had not even shown up in the end. He didn't understand what kind of emperor this was, who showed up only when something needed to be sent to certain death, after all. They were now defending the empire, and it needed to be constantly monitored. In the end, he even suggested starting a riot and refusing to work. But the Duke turned to Paul and said that he had one question, but not on this topic. Paul immediately said that he was ready to listen to him. Since he could not go to the palace, he would definitely answer all his questions so that he would not feel somehow deprived. What did he then ask? What does it mean when someone asks him to kiss? His assistant was a little surprised by such a question, but since he promised to answer, after thinking, he still said it. He had already started to talk about this incident, but then suddenly realized what exactly the Duke had asked him and asked, was he really at a meeting with a lady and not with the Emperor? Chayton first thought that perhaps he could have lied somehow, but then he realized how it would look from the outside and immediately said that everything was correct. He was at a meeting with a lady. Paul was amazed when he heard this. He said that he, as a person who was recently on the verge of death, finally found his love. So he believed that it was necessary to tell absolutely everyone about this, because this was a significant event. Of course, the Duke told him in a rough voice not to even think about it. Paul realized that it was better not to talk about such things, and finally came to his senses. He cleared his throat and said that, in any case, he understood that the lady turned out to be quite brave. After all, she was the first, and asking a man like him for a kiss was truly something unusual. Chayton asked him to be quieter, and then said in a stern voice that he was ready to ask a man who had been married for 10 years what it means if a girl asks for a kiss first, and whether she might have some feelings for him. When the man said all this, he was a little worried. However, he also said that, for reference, her wedding had recently been cancelled, so he should have known all the details of this information. After thinking, his assistant said that he could say that everything could be because of the Duke, because the lady first cancelled the wedding, and after that immediately asked him for a kiss. Paul explained that from all this, it immediately becomes clear that the lady clearly has feelings for him. Ladies will never simply ask a man who is indifferent to kiss them first. However, as far as the break in the engagement was concerned, it wasn't even worth mentioning. After he told him all about it, he immediately asked what the Duke himself thought about it. He asked if this was not the most important thing. The Duke then seriously thought about it. He touched the earring that was dulling his madness, and did not know what to do. It is quite obvious that the situation is not the best. A problem with the dragon seal has arisen recently. In addition, the magical artifact has gradually begun to deteriorate. At this rate, the dragon will either go crazy and kill everyone, or simply force him to commit suicide. But when he held this woman in his arms, he managed to hold out for several days, and after this kiss, even the noise that had not stopped in his head for several days stopped. In response to his assistant's question, he smiled and said that he realized that he definitely needed this woman. Some time has passed since then, and Rosie was incredibly happy with the time she now had. She managed to get a good night's sleep, eat a delicious meal, and no one bothered her anymore. The girl thought that wasting time was really very good for her. The girl was distracted from her thoughts because the maid brought her dessert. It was toast with jam. She was delighted to think that it looked very tasty. Rosie thanked them. However, as the maids left, the echidna began to smile. One of them, when they moved a little further away, whispered, "Was that really possible? There was bread and jam, and the jar wouldn't even open." The other maid smiled and calmed her down, saying that she was already timid, and that she had been caught like that, so there was nothing to say. Moreover, if she were the one reporting such things, she would have been fired long ago. One of the maids also said that there had been rumors lately that she had changed somehow recently, so they needed to find out more about it. So they remained standing nearby and waited for the effect. One of the maids said that even for her it was difficult to open such jars. But at that moment, Rosie easily twisted the lid of the jar of jam, which greatly surprised the maids. The maids couldn't believe it. They didn't understand how she could unscrew that jar so easily. After all, they specifically found the one that no one in the kitchen could unscrew. The girl, hearing their indignation, immediately turned around and asked if she shouldn't have opened it, because she thought that this is exactly why they brought it. The maids immediately said that this was not the issue at all, and that she had misunderstood them. The girl then looked at the jar and said, "So it's your responsibility to completely prepare the food for consumption." And out of habit, I opened it myself. She closed the jar again and told them to open it themselves. She was ready to wait, because she didn't want to relieve them of their responsibilities. The maid was very surprised to hear this. One cow now said that she would wait until they opened the door for her, because it was still their job, and she had done the wrong thing. The maid took the jar of jam and tried to open it herself. At that moment, she was wondering if those strange rumors about her were really true, since she usually behaved so fussily. But now she was completely calm. However, she could not open this jar even with a lot of effort, and because of this, she was already starting to get angry. The maid herself noticed how the girl had slightly covered it, so she did not understand why the lid could not be unscrewed. Ramsey, at this point, watching her efforts, sighed heavily and said that it was all useless. There was no sense in them. So she took the jar of jam and said that she should leave because the bread would soon cool down. The maid immediately realized that all this sounded too much like an insult. This meant that the girl intended to tighten it even more in order to laugh at her. She knew that the girl was trying to make her look worthless in front of others and just find a reason to scold her. But she believed that even for her, it was too low to stoop to such a level. However, the maid was even more surprised when she saw how easily Rosie opened the jar again. She made herself a lovely piece of toast with jam and said that they should all focus on strength training because it must be really hard to work when their bodies are so weak and they can't even open a jar of jam. She was also irritated by the fact that they let the bread cool down because of such a trifle. Even though she scolded them, she still praised them and said that the bread was delicious even when cold, so they did a great job. Some time passed since then. She finally finished her snack and said that she would like to take a little walk and left the cleaning to the maids. They bowed and immediately said that they would take care of everything, after which Rosie left the gazebo and, stretching, realized that she was actually very full. After this dried fish and jerky, everything seemed delicious to her. She even ate toast with a huge layer of jam and was very pleased with it. When she went out into the garden, walking through it, she was delighted. She had never seen anything so beautiful. While Rosia was walking through the garden, she suddenly saw that a small chick began to fall from the nest. She ran up very quickly and caught it right at the ground so that it would not get hurt. When she saw that everything was fine with him, she breathed a sigh of relief. But she herself did not understand how it happened that he fell straight out of his nest. She raised her head up and saw a small nest that was located on the very top branch. Then she realized that this is probably where he fell from. She took it very carefully with her lips in order to climb the tree and told the chick not to worry because she would help him climb back to his family. The girl immediately began to climb the tree. She did it quite well, and in just a few minutes, she found herself on the very top branch, where she was met by surprised birds. She was very sorry that the chick had to go through this, but she only captured him with her lips for a moment while climbing up, so he should not be so afraid of her now. She put him back with the family. Everyone immediately started whining loudly because they understood that this could have ended very badly. But Rosie herself was happy that everything turned out this way. But then she was already about to climb down. However, when she looked straight ahead and saw how beautiful the view was from there, she couldn't resist and decided to sit down and watch for a bit. She saw a view of the earth that she defended with her life. She could finally see it well now. No one was looking for it anymore. So she could relax and rest. But not even a few minutes had passed when, suddenly, under her tree, there appeared a multitude of servants calling the girl. We didn't understand how she ended up there at all, and also asked her to come down immediately, because she could have gotten seriously injured being so high up. Rosie yelled back at them to stop distracting her and get back to their work. Everything was fine with her. But the maids told the lady not to move and that they would bring help right now. Then the girl wondered if her behavior really seemed dangerous and strange to them. She didn't know if ordinary people really couldn't climb trees. Then she thought about what they would do if some monster or enemy was chasing them, how they would escape then. At that moment, even the Duke was called to the tree. He saw the rose and was very scared and asked what it all meant. He also brought several knights with him. The girl saw them and was very shocked. She did not understand why they had come so quickly. The man then directed the knights towards the girl and told them to immediately take her out of there and not to dare harm her under any circumstances. Rosie realized that the situation had escalated and she couldn't pretend that she could go down on her own, so she had to just sit motionless on that branch. She understood that, in this place, noble ladies were not able to climb trees and decided to remember this information because it could be very useful to her. But it was also a big disappointment for her because she really loved being high up and looking at the beautiful views. When some time had passed, the knight finally lowered the girl to the ground. The Duke immediately ran up to her and asked what kind of trick that was. He didn't understand whether she had really pulled this stunt out of her house arrest. He even suggested that the girl was trying to kill herself, although it was complete stupidity. Rosie immediately told the Duke that everything was wrong and asked him to just calmly listen to her and finally understand what situation had happened. But the man was very angry. He didn't even let her say a word. Rosie looked at him in surprise, not understanding why he was so angry, because nothing like that had happened. The man, meanwhile, looked at the maids and asked how they could allow the lady they serve to do such a thing. Sergeant was immediately told in a poopy's head that they were just clearing the table and therefore could not be near her. The man continued to scold them and even said that he would ensure that they were all fired for such misconduct. The maids fell on their knees and began to beg him not to fire them, and also swore that this would never happen again. Well, The man didn't even listen to them. He started to leave, saying that he didn't need servants who had no respect for their master. But Rosie stopped the Duke and said that if someone can't take their eyes off you, then there must be a compelling reason to hold them accountable. However, at that time, this also applied directly to him. The man, hearing this, was surprised and asked what exactly she meant. And the girl said that she herself needed to hold accountable, perhaps turning to the emperor with a request to replace her own father in such a case. The man got angry and asked how she dared to talk to him like that, because he didn't understand why she started to so vehemently defend these maids who couldn't even cope with their duties. But the girl interrupted him and said that the parent's duty is to never take their eyes off their child. And since her own father refused to even look at her, she did not understand how she could expect others to respect her and follow her absolutely everywhere. She explained that it all started with the Duke, when he himself did not value her. So how could he think that others would do it instead of him? The man didn't even have anything to say in response to this. Rosie then looked these people straight in the eyes and said that he couldn't blame these innocent people, no matter who served her. She said that she was still the unloved, illegitimate daughter of the Duke of Lyton, so she was nothing more than a simple Roseanne lieutenant, and did not want to feed herself false hopes. Without waiting for an answer from the Duke, she looked at the maids, and said that they could already get up from the ground, because it was probably unpleasant there. The maids didn't know what to do. They were expecting some words from the Duke, but he was silent. Rosie got angry and asked, "Didn't you hear the order, or don't you want to listen to my words either?" The maids were very scared, and suddenly stood up. Then the girl said that she needed to do other things, so she left. After she left with her maids, the man wanted to turn to his knights and ask if Rosie was really right. However, he did not do so. That same evening, the girl escaped from the estate through her open window. She wanted to walk around the city and find out what had changed there since the last time she had been there. Walking past robbers and hooligans who were beating men and taking their last money, the girl realized that nothing good had happened there. She came to the conclusion that the empire still had rot inside. This still disappointed her a little. In fact, since ancient times, the royal lineage has been dependent on war. Even in reckless battles, there were heroes who brought victory because they could not stop. However, despite their prosperity and dazzling victories, the shadow of starving commoners always followed in their footsteps. While Rosie was sealed, she wondered if the whole world she lived in would change, even a little. However, now that she returned to reality, the girl realized that nothing had changed. A girl walking through the city suddenly heard some men in front of her, as well as a poor woman from whom they took something. One of the hooligans smiled and said that she would have simply given it away, and that's all, especially since there wasn't much there, so he didn't understand why she wanted to bother herself with this little thing. The little girl said that this money was needed for bread. Her father had not eaten anything for several days, so she promised that she would bring him at least something. The hooligan asked who told her that this was her last money for food. He told her to go and earn some more money, and after that, she would buy herself everything she needed. When he looked at the amount of money in the bag, he realized that it would be enough to pay his rent. But if you also take into account the fee for the place, it's still not enough. The little girl was very scared and asked what they meant by the payment, since it was rent and she could still understand. The man gave the bag of money to his partner and told the little girl approaching her that the world had always been cruel, and everyone else paid without any objections. So he did not understand why she decided to be stubborn. The girl screamed and said that they all pay only because they are afraid of them. After all, they are cutthroats, that is, gangsters. The man then grabbed her hand and asked if she would like to personally see why everyone is afraid of them. He had already swung at her. However, at that moment, Rosie came up and intercepted his hand. She told the groups in a voice that now he had intrigued her too, and asked why people were so afraid of him. When the guy saw that his plan was now falling apart, he looked at this girl and asked who she was. They didn't understand that she was crazy. Where did she get so much courage from? The girl, meanwhile, told the man that she understood perfectly well that he needed to collect rent. But if he rented out his house, then of course he had the right to receive money for it. The man did not listen to her words. He noticed that the silhouette of this girl looked very small, so he assumed that most likely she was a woman, and this means that she hopes that she can rely on the strength of this girl. Of course, he imagined himself to be very cool, and thought that the woman definitely could not do anything to him. But when he tried to move the hand that this woman was holding, he still couldn't do anything. He didn't even move it a centimeter. Everyone immediately started laughing at him, and Rose said that he probably thought that she was an ordinary girl, and therefore he could easily defeat the two of them. However, she said that he did not have to worry that he was the only one like that, because it was not like that. Everyone thinks when they first meet her that she is an ordinary, weak girl who is not capable of doing anything. And then they realize the whole reality at that moment. She twisted his arm so hard that he even bent over. It was difficult for the man to just stand on his feet. After Rosie finally let go of his hand, he immediately looked at his comrades and asked, "Are they really going to continue to just stand there and watch as he gets hurt?" One of his partners smiled and said that his courage was worthy of respect. However, he was not like their boss, who could give in just because the woman was of feminine descent. Therefore, he was already heading towards her in order to fight back. However, before he had even managed to take a few steps, he received a kick straight to the head from Rosie. The man immediately fell down without several teeth and unconscious. Rosie said that whoever he was, she didn't care at all, because she was for justice. Some time had passed since then. She had already dealt with all the hooligans, but she still could not stop worrying, because she was not sure if they understood everything she told them. The men, who were lying with their heads to the ground and pelvises up, immediately shouted in one voice that they understood everything, so she didn't have to worry. They promised that in the future, they would only charge fair rent and no more fees. Rosie replied that they needed to help each other and live in harmony, so they could consider that this was a lesson for them, and she really hoped that they would learn it. After she finally finished sorting things out with them, the girl said that they could get up and had to go and return the money to everyone from whom they took these so-called contributions. But she also warned that if they do not learn today's lesson and return to their old ways, then next time, everything will not end as well as it did that day. The men bowed and immediately said that they understood everything after the girl let them go. They quickly ran away because they were afraid that she could bring them even more pain. After they left, Rosie turned to the girl and asked if her hand, which the bully had grabbed, was okay. The girl smiled and thanked her for her concern, and said that he grabbed her but not too hard, so everything was fine. In any case, Rosie examined her wrist and said that they would no longer demand other payments from her, but she would still have to pay rent, because those were the rules. The little girl said that she understood everything. After all, they rented this house, and it was necessary after that. She asked the woman what her name was. She explained that she wanted to thank her one day for what she did that day, and therefore needed to know the name. Rose told her not to think about it. She would help anyone who was treated unfairly, and that is why she did not need any retribution for it. She only told the girl that when she grows up, she should not ignore crying children, muster up the courage, and ask the reasons for their tears, and if possible, even help them. The girl thought that this woman was incredibly cool, so she promised that she would definitely do so if anything happened. After this, Rosie turned around and left, and the girl once again thanked her for protecting her. This really became a very big event in her life, but the woman thought that it was not she who should be thanked for being able to protect her, but she did not tell the girls about this. The next day, she had a meeting with the Duke, and he heard the news that she was injured. In fact, he heard the news that the lady who canceled her wedding supposedly caused a ruckus and climbed a tree. She took this issue very calmly. She said that she was not injured. She just tore her dress a little when she was climbing to the very top. As soon as the man heard this, he was very surprised. He jumped to his feet and asked if she really climbed up there herself, and also asked her not to say that she really risked her own life for such stupidity. The girl didn't see anything wrong with this. She just calmly replied that the chick had fallen out of its nest, and if she hadn't helped it return, its life would definitely have been in danger. She didn't want to allow this, so she helped him. Chaitin, having heard this, was still amazed. He didn't understand why she was so reckless. When he finally took his place back, the girl told him not to say that the Grand Duke can't climb trees, because it's a pretty useful skill. She remembered that he was quite cool and strong when he was younger, so she assumed that most likely this strength remained in him, just somewhere deep inside. At that moment, the man sighed heavily and said, "It's not that, it's just that you, lady, are acting recklessly." And this fact irritated him. Rosie, indignant, said that, in fact, she would have preferred to hear from him that she was very strong and brave rather than reckless. But she decided to change the topic of conversation in order not to argue even more, and asked how he had been doing lately. She meant, of course, his curse. Chaitin, hearing this, immediately began to wonder. Could it be that because of that kiss, it had not bothered him for several days? However, he could not bring himself to tell her about it. He was too embarrassed even to think about it. When he was silent for a while and did not answer her question, Rosie asked why he had become so suddenly silent, since all this time he could not even shut his mouth. However, when she looked at his face, she realized that something was definitely wrong. She noticed some rather strange signs in his behavior. The man had a cold sweat and a red face. He could not hide the appearance, no matter how hard he tried. She noticed it all. And now even he could not finish the sentence he started. This worried her very much. She suggested that perhaps he was in incredible pain, and she remembered that his symptoms stopped when they held hands. So she suggested that perhaps she could do it again. Rosie reached out to him and took him by the wrist. As soon as the man saw this, the redness immediately disappeared from his face, and the girl realized that it really worked. He had a rather clear look again, so this made her feel much calmer, because she was already worried that she wouldn't be able to help him in any way, and that he would have to remain in this state for some time. Then Rosie said that she wanted to clarify something. The girl explained that even though his symptoms disappeared as soon as they held hands, it still didn't mean that she could completely remove this curse from him. She also said that, besides, this still doesn't cancel it out. The man, a little embarrassed, said that he actually hadn't even thought about it. And as soon as she heard this, it became a great relief for her, because she was really worried that he might have some false hopes that she would not be able to justify. After that, she continued to hold his hand, and also asked if she could ask him something else. Despite the fact that the man did not like it, he said that if it was not something strange, then of course she could ask him. Then Rosie put his hand on her knee and asked him what exactly he felt at that moment. Chayton certainly didn't expect this. He became even more embarrassed because of this. He didn't understand what had happened to her and why she had suddenly started doing such things. She suggested that perhaps she was talking about their hands now. However, she also probably meant the kiss that happened between them. He didn't know how he should respond to all this. However, then he thought that Rosie had started to behave really strangely, and immediately remembered Pole's words that said that perhaps she had fallen in love with him. In that case, he knew that as a true gentleman, he had to give her some kind of answer. He smiled, looked her straight in the eyes, and said that he liked everything. Rosie replied that, in that case, she suggested that he continue like that. Seeing his surprised expression, she immediately explained what exactly she meant. Of course, she was talking about their relationship. He did say that he wanted her to treat him with her own hands. It's quite natural that for this, they need to be a little closer. She thought that he would be uncomfortable communicating with her because of the Emperor. However, he himself said that he liked everything, and that is why he believes that she could continue this treatment through contacts. The man blushed even more from this. Then Rosie asked if his case was still not in order. Although they were holding hands at that moment, Chayton finally understood why she took his hand. The man was very upset that he had misunderstood her, and was even ashamed of his own thoughts. But the girl asked him what he thought about telling everyone that they were a couple so they could use it as a disguise. And since it's a fake relationship, there's no emotional attachment between them, so she thought it wouldn't cause them any problems at all. At that moment, someone suddenly stood up very abruptly from his seat and told the princess that he remembered that he still had some important things to do, that he had to do. Therefore, he needed to leave immediately. He asked if she could forgive him and say goodbye to him for that day. Rosie didn't object. She said that there was no problem with it, but she was a little embarrassed by the fact that he never answered her question. The man, leaving, said that next time he would visit her properly, after which he closed the door behind him and left. Rosie didn't understand what was wrong with his behavior. She assumed that perhaps he was disgusted by such a relationship. Or perhaps he even had someone in love with him. The next time she felt she should apologize to him after Rosie finished her tea, she decided to go out and take a little walk. The Duke had come all this way for her. However, she didn't ask him the most important thing. She felt that she should have immediately asked how he ended up connected to this curse in the first place. And because of this, she was upset. She wanted to find out so many details and questions. However, suddenly a Chayton appeared, and she forgot about everything in the world and couldn't even formulate these questions normally in her head, let alone ask. Well, the girl still didn't understand why she still hadn't felt his presence. She brought it as if she assumed that perhaps it was because at the moment he was stronger than her, perhaps her body had weakened. However, the strength remained the same, so it was all rather strange. The girl was standing in the garden on the bridge when a maid suddenly ran up to her. She looked a little worried, and it was clearly noticeable that the girl was in a hurry. When the maid came closer to Rosie, she said that a guest was waiting for the girl in the reception hall. She did not object and immediately went there, but she became curious who it could be. She suggested that perhaps it was someone else's because he could have forgotten something, and because of this, he returned. Or maybe, like her, he wanted to ask something, but he forgot. And now that they had separated, he finally remembered. This time, she knew that she needed to ask him everything that was currently bothering her. So the girl opened the door with complete confidence that it was really Hertz. Rosie even began to whisper all the questions she wanted to ask. For example, how he got this curse and how he joined the squad for enslaving evil dragons. But upon entering the room, she realized that it was not someone else's at all. It was another man. And upon seeing the girl, he smiled, maliciously, and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Seeing her surprised expression, he asked what was wrong. She looked as if she expected to see someone else in this place. And this upset him. He was a tall, fair-haired, golden-eyed man. He had a rather attractive appearance. However, he behaved very arrogantly. Rosie was the one who led the war that was unleashed by the Empire to victory. Everyone called her a hero. But in the end, she was a prisoner who was not freed from the Endless Seal. No more than a fighting dog who brings victory to the Empire in his teeth. The emperors passed down the rights of ownership of the hero from generation to generation, and not one of them even mentioned simply freeing him. And here in front of her was Crown Prince Joseph. He held the hero on a leash and became his next master. Ruse considered all this reckless. She simply assumed that it must have been the Duke. Because of this, she completely forgot herself and did not even detect the presence of the prince with the help of her ability. Accordingly, he managed to catch her off guard. Joseph asked why the princess was so tense. After all, he came just to talk to her and not to give her an ultimatum. Smiling, he told her to sit down first, at least for a little while, because his neck was already hurting from looking up at her. He wanted to even out their eye contact. The girl suggested that perhaps he could even recognize her, and because of this, she became even more wary. She nevertheless came up and sat down so that they would be more comfortable. When they sealed her, they gained the ability to recognize her soul. It was this ability that was passed down from generation to generation, along with the rights to this property. If George inherited this title, then perhaps he also inherited this ability, and accordingly, he could easily recognize it. So Rosie thought about the fact that perhaps she needed to kill him right now. But the girl had her emotions. The man stood up from his seat and, coming closer to her before she had even had time to sit down, said that he was going to get straight to the point. They were dragging out the intrigue. He placed his hand on the princess's shoulder and said that he had come to take back what was rightfully his. Of course, the girl understood what exactly he meant, so she became even more frightened because she was exposed. He noticed that her soul was missing, and therefore came to take her back to that place. She believed that she had to catch him off guard now, and quickly find something that could serve as a weapon. She immediately began to carefully examine the entire room to find this object. Rosie also intended to do this before the Crown Prince revealed his sword. Perhaps she could simply do it with a candlestick or a fork. Or at worst, she would have to manage it empty-handed. Well, then suddenly, Joseph said the word marriage. He asked why she called off the engagement. The girl certainly didn't expect to hear this. She didn't understand what he was talking about at all. At some point, she even thought she had misheard. She pulled her hand out of his and said, "You said you came to return what you lost. Is that less important than finding out the reason for the breakup of my engagement?" The guy said that he had already heard rumors that she had gone crazy, and now that he was next to her, he realized that they were not lying at all. He asked if she really hated this marriage so much. But when he stayed next to her for more and more time, he realized that she had really changed and was now like a different person. But Rose could now breathe a sigh of relief looking at his carefree behavior. She realized that most likely he didn't know anything, so she could be calm. So she said that she had made the guest stand for too long, so she asked him to sit down and they could calmly discuss everything that interested him. Joseph didn't understand how she could change so quickly. However, sitting opposite her, he sighed heavily. In fact, the girl had been too excited before and already wanted to take drastic action, but now she realized that it was in vain. If she had immediately killed the Crown Prince, the rest of his escort would have immediately begun an attack on her. But the girl couldn't put these people from Joseph in danger. So she decided to watch him closely for a while longer, and only then draw some conclusions. Joseph spoke first. He said that he had personally become convinced that their princess had gone crazy, and now he had finally decided to talk seriously. His smile was so big that his teeth were sticking out. He opened a small jar of sugar and, taking out one cube, said that she was so against the idea of marrying the Marquis that she refused him, and until now it had not mattered at all. However, he asked if the whole thing wasn't about the new affair with the Grand Duke of Varfeu, because that's exactly how it seemed to him. Rosie then smiled and realized that he had grown quite a lot. The last time she saw him, he was still just learning to read and write. And now he was already building conspiracy theories about the love stories of other people. Joseph said that no matter how crazy she was, one could not forget the difference between public and private affairs. He said that she should have kept in mind that high treason could be on the horizon, and should have taken some precautions. But for some reason, the girl did not do so. Rosie looked at him with great contempt, because in front of her was a boy who used to write like a worm, and now he spoke so rudely to her. Of course, this did not suit her, and even irritated her. But Joseph, seeing her expression, said that he came to return the loyalty of the Leighton family, and if he becomes emperor, he must use the power of this house. Therefore, he asked the girl to think very carefully, because the Grand Duke will ultimately be left completely alone on the battlefield, and no one knows how his fate will end, whether he will be lucky this time. But Rosie believed that this man was still too naive, a child who couldn't even hide his goals or intention to kill someone. That's why he openly told her about it, but the girl already knew what she had to do in such a situation. So she asked, "Are you now just jealous that I preferred the Grand Duke and not you?" Hearing this, Joseph was very surprised and asked how she could even come to such a thought. But the girl did not pay attention to him. Now it was her turn to grin maliciously, so she said that, in any case, everything she did with the Duke was her personal business, so he didn't need to interfere in it. The man was very impressed by her determination, and told the princess that this was the last time he would turn a blind eye to her behavior. So he suggested that she think better next time before talking like that again. But Rosie wasn't going to stop. She said that he had asked her the reason for her refusal of this marriage, but the answer was still the same. It was her business, and she didn't want to enlighten him. When the prince became seriously angry, he threw a cup of hot tea towards the princess, but she was able to dodge it, and the water only hit her hair. Rosie replied that she didn't care about his threat. She did what she thought was right. In fact, the girl was able to intercept the thing he threw at her in time, and thanks to this, only her hair got wet, and her entire skin did not get burned. Seeing this, Joseph was very amazed. He could not believe that she caught this cup with her bare hands, and was also able to react so quickly. But Rosie at that moment smiled, and said that apparently she had finally arrived. Her very boyfriend immediately understood what she meant, and because of this, he was quite scared. In a voice, trembling with anxiety, he asked Lady Barks if she was going to throw it at him, too. The girl calmly replied that this was exactly what she was going to do, and also asked if he really had any problems or even complaints about this. Of course, Joseph thought that this was some kind of childish threat, and it seemed funny. However, he did not understand what kind of depressing pressure it was from her. He had never seen anything like this before. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore, and the man shouted loudly at her and told her to quickly put the cup back on the table. He said that if she dared to raise her hand against him, she should know that His Majesty the Emperor would not leave her alive. Rosie didn't understand why he took it so seriously, because she was just joking. But he was really scared, as if she was ready to kill him on the spot. The servants should be arriving soon to clean up, so she thought it was better to finish this game as quickly as possible. Otherwise, suddenly, from her pressure, he would actually faint. But Joseph also decided to continue the conversation. He asked the lady if she knew about him. He spoke about the hero who will seal. He protects the empire and serves His Highness the Emperor. He said that if he had summoned this hero to destroy Lighton's house, he would have very much doubted that the girl would have continued to behave so arrogantly. So he asked her to just know that Her Majesty's puppet would not show any suffering just because she had lost the rest of her mind. The girl didn't understand what he was talking about, but Joseph smiled happily and said that now the creature that would carry out any order of His Majesty was precisely he, and was a puppet. So she shouldn't even expect mercy from him. She should know that he is simply not allowed to experience any feelings. A puppet like this is absolutely not even capable of anything like that in principle. At that moment, Rosie could no longer listen to all this. She threw the cup that he had then thrown at her and hid it against the wall near the man. When Joseph saw this who was very shocked, he looked at the girl and asked what she had just done. He really could not believe that she dared to do such a thing. But the girl made an innocent expression on her face and said that her hand simply slipped. She didn't mean to do it at all, of course. This was not true, and she even said it with a hint of sarcasm in her voice. Joseph became very angry. He asked what she meant. She didn't want to, because it was a direct attempt on the life of the crown prince. She herself should have understood that such a pathetic excuse would not be enough for her. But the girl asked that, in that case, he immediately call that very hero, the puppet he had just spoken about. She said that he was sure of it, because in that case, he would have to admit that she had threatened him. They were alone in that waiting room, and that meant that Lady Lightyear had scared him so much that he had to call upon the hero himself to destroy that family. As soon as Joseph heard this, he even blushed with shame. But the girl was grieving over her victory. She said that people would definitely begin to doubt his suitability for the title of Crown Prince. She also said that she thought it would be better to just end today's meeting on a warm note. However, if he wanted, then of course they could continue all this and sort it out to the very end. The man then seriously thought about this and realized that she was indeed right. He was still far from being able to keep the hero under control. And if it became known that he had become an enemy of this house, it would be a very serious problem. The guy was very worried. He didn't know what to do in such a situation. However, at that moment, someone suddenly knocked on their room door. He immediately looked at the door because he didn't understand who it could be. Getting up from her seat, Rosie smiled happily and said that apparently they had finally arrived. The man became even more worried. He asked in an anxious voice where she was heading. Rose didn't understand what he was talking about, because as the mistress of the house, she should have simply opened the door when there was a knock. The girl did just that. And at that moment, her father immediately burst into the room. He turned to His Highness and sincerely thanked him for finding a window in his busy schedule to visit them. He said that he had recently placed an order for the best varieties of tea and desserts, so they should arrive soon. But he quickly fell silent, because he saw that there was only one cup on the table, and asked his daughter if she had really prepared tea only for herself. Of course, he got angry at her because of this, but then he realized that most likely it was his hands that did this, and he couldn't believe that they did this because of their previous conversation. But Rosie interrupted his conversation and said that everything was wrong. She asked him to look at the place where the cup had fallen. The man quickly ran to the place and, collecting the fragments, asked what had happened to them. Since he had just bought this set, it took him more than a month to bring it from abroad, and a lot of effort. But then suddenly, the Duke realized that now was not the time to worry about the cup. He had to understand why it became broken in the first place. She turned to Rose and asked her not to say that his suspicions about the situation that had happened must be correct. The girl replied that if he now thinks that she left her, then he was certainly right. However, she suggested that he should first listen to her and only then make the final verdict. But for obvious reasons, the Duke couldn't do this. He shouted at his daughter and said that he didn't need any explanations. He had begged her to stay out of trouble and not to do anything for once. When he asked who in the entire empire could behave like a real hooligan, the girl said that, for example, the prince himself was also a hooligan. The man didn't even have anything to say in response. Joseph simply sat in his place and quietly watched the situation unfolding in the hope that the storm would pass him by. The Duke, indignant, asked when he had even said that the guy was behaving like a hooligan. Besides, he was sure that the man had only reacted that way because she had been the first to throw the cup at him. He simply had no choice. She immediately shook her head in disagreement, saying that everything was completely wrong, that it was the crown prince who threw it at her first, and if he didn't believe her, he could have asked the man himself. But the Duke whispered that the girl should stop already. He asked that if His Highness raised this issue, he did not understand what they should do then. After all, he really considered his daughter to be wrong in this situation. When he turned to the prince and asked for forgiveness from His Highness, he said that his daughter had been ill recently, and that was why she behaved this way. So he asked him to show his understanding in this situation. Rosie watched all this and thought that her father was too pathetic when His Highness did not answer anything to this. He did not even turn his head. The Duke began to worry. But the girl said that everything was exactly as she said, after which she turned around and began to leave, thinking that there was no longer any reason for her to stay there. Since he was going to refuse his fatherly duty, the least he could do was to clean up after her. So the girl decided to leave. But as soon as she had already started heading towards the door, the Duke suddenly grabbed her hand and asked her to wait a little longer. His look was somehow crazy. She didn't understand what was happening to him and why he was looking at her like that. And she also really hoped that she asked her to stay, not because he was too afraid to be alone with the crown prince. She took his hand, at first, quite gently. The man immediately asked Rosie what she wanted, but the girl suddenly began to squeeze his hand, very hard, and said that she was betting everything on him, and she was very tired, so she would like to rest a little. Rosie thought about how pathetic this whole situation was because the Duke had acted this way. She also didn't know if she would ever be able to cure him of this cowardice, and even if so, she had a very long way to go. In the end, she actually went to her room after some time. Looking out of the window, she saw that Joseph had already started heading back to his room after meeting with Peach. When the girl came to the conclusion that he knew nothing, however, she is sure that the Emperor definitely knew the truth, and simply did not tell his son about it for some reason. A greedy person still ends up being overly cautious and suspicious. It's quite natural that he wants to hide his weakness, even from his own son. This is the conclusion Rosie came to. However, the crown prince is not the emperor's son for him. He is just a rival who claims to be the king. She believed that he was saying all this nonsense about her only because that was his nature. She could not believe that he thought of her as a puppet who was incapable of experiencing any feelings.